Hi everybody, this is the first lecture on chapter 3, and we're going to be talking about culture. And culture is all the different things that make up a society and the things that we pass on from one generation to the next in a group or society. It doesn't have to be a huge society. It can be a small group. For example, I belong to a writing group that I've belonged to for years, and like 10 years. And we have our own kind of norms and guidelines about being in the group, and we pass those on as we go along. So culture includes language, and then values, which you've talked about before. And culture is not something that you're born with. So we are born, we're not born as blank slates, right? We are born with a lot of things, a lot of tendencies and a lot of other things. We're not born with nothing, right? There's evidence that we're born with a tendency towards a particular political persuasion, because conservatives and liberals tend to have different makeups, like personality makeups, and those personality makeups tend to be in part something that we're born with. But in terms of culture, culture is not innate, and innate means that you come into the world with it. And culture, the things that make up culture vary all over the world. Cultures can be very different. But there are things that are present in every culture, and these are called cultural universals. And so for example, the incest taboo is present in every culture. Some of the facial expressions that we make, like a smile looks like a smile everywhere. Anger on the face looks the same everywhere. And all societies have religion. And religion is generally some way of explaining, some version of a supernatural, some way of explaining a world that people were, kind of unable to understand. Before science, we were unable to understand the world, and religion provided an explanation for how the world worked, and then connecting people to a sense of the sacred. And that's present in every culture, but it looks different in every culture. So we need culture, right, in order to survive. So the culture that we have within us allows us to move around throughout the day, right? We're not having to walk through the world processing the billions of pieces of data that hit our eyes as we walk around the world. We're able to categorize and make sense of the world. So it allows us to, figure out how to get our needs met in terms of food and water and basic survival, and also just how to thrive in society. And it creates order. So, part of our culture, I talked about how to ride an elevator. So part of our culture teaches us how to ride an elevator so that we don't just have mayhem every time we go to get on an elevator. And we can have, when someone dies, our culture tells us what to do when someone dies. So we have some, predictable events that need to take place. When someone dies, there needs to be a death certificate, right? That's not true in every culture, but in our culture, it is true. There needs to be a death certificate. There needs to be a cause of death on the death certificate. And, we need to have that in place. The body needs to go to a funeral home. There needs to be some kind of disposition of the body. The family needs to make a decision about services. And so there's an entire process that you go through after someone dies that provides some containment for how things work. And then religion, people's religion, and the different aspects of their religion can also bring together a process for people after they die. When I worked on the World Trade Center disaster in New York City, and a lot of my work involved talking with family members, and after someone was identified, we would talk with the family about what had been identified. So, often those identifications were, a fragment of bone that had been identified through DNA. After the, in the beginning, most of the identifications were done through DNA. And this led to, a lot of difficult decisions for people, because once you had remains identified, the chances were good that you were going to have additional remains identified. And we identified remains for almost 4 years. And so the choices had to be made about, what are you going to do? So you come in, let's say 6 months after 9/11, and you sit down with us and we say these remains have been identified, and then you have to make a decision. And so after 9/11, the medical examiner's office, we kind of created a culture, and we created forms, and we created a process that to kind of contain the experience. So when families came in, they had to make a decision. Normally, when you have a body, you have a burial or a cremation. But what do you do if you have pieces of a body, and that in next week we could call you and there would be more pieces? And we never called them pieces. We always called them remains, because for us, talking in terms of body parts or pieces of bodies was simply too difficult. So we always would say we have additional remains. And so that was part of our culture. So families had to make these decisions, and in certain religions, there are certain rules about how you deal with remains. And because of the situation in 9/11, it was difficult to make those, to follow those rules. For example, in Judaism, you're supposed to bury the body within 24 hours of death, and someone's supposed to be with the body the entire time from death to burial. And in fact, in Judaism, they have people that you can hire to sit with the body, so that there's someone with the body until death. Or in other religions, it's the responsibility to bathe and cleanse the body after death. And this was obviously, you can't do that after 9/11. And we had this, when we reached the end of the identification process and we went through the DNA laboratory, we took each person who died, and we went through one at a time, and were there any other possible matches, any other possible remains? And then we basically kind of closed each person, and we went through this process for all, there were almost 3,000 victims, and that was how we kind of brought it to a close. And the families, for the most part, were not aware that we were doing this. At this point, we were, the involvement of the families was minimal, because we were so far out from the actual events of 9/11. And I was close with a family that was Jewish, who had remains of their daughter had been identified, and they were going to bury her in Israel. And I called them on a Friday to tell them that on Monday we were going to be sending out a letter letting the families know, we were going to start mailing this letter that we were done with the identification process, that we'd done all we could. And, so for the families that I knew or had a relationship with, I was calling them in advance and, letting family groups know so they could let family members know that these letters were coming. And so when I called her on Friday, this, for her, me saying the identification process is over, for her, triggered that 24-hour clock. So even though it was, May of 2005, and her daughter had died on September 11th, for her, the 24-hour clock was triggered. and she spent the entire weekend trying to claim her daughter's remains so she could fly them to Israel for burial. And it created this entire tempest, her trying, because I had no idea she was going to do that. She didn't tell me she was going to do that. And the remains for 9/11 were not released to funeral homes using the same process as remains on the regular side. It was something we had to do. It was specific to World Trade Center. You couldn't come at 2 o'clock in the morning and get World Trade Center remains. You had to come during the week, during the day when our staff was present. So it kind of created this storm. And so that for her was her interpretation of the culture. So culture, we use culture in a similar way that animals use instincts, right? Human beings, our brains are so complicated and so complex that we don't come out of the womb with our brains complete. We come out with them very much incomplete, right? So a horse is born and a couple hours later it's up running around. Well, we're born and we literally can do nothing except eat and poop and cry. So animals have instincts, right? They know to be afraid of a certain sound or a certain color or whatever the instincts are for their species. Human beings have very few instincts. We have the instinct, for example, of the fear of heights, right? This is something that's wired into us, which obviously makes sense. Having us afraid of heights is a pretty basic survival mechanism, right? If you want to keep things alive, make them afraid of heights. That's like survival 101. But we don't have instincts for a lot of things. So we have culture and the process, which we'll talk about next, of socialization, whereby we learn the culture. So it allows us to learn how to function in the world. So because we don't have instincts, we need culture to learn how to survive. And culture is made up of material and non-material components, and some components are both material and non-material. So material components are the things that you can touch, basically, and non-material are the ideas, the symbols. Symbols can actually be material and non-material. If you think about like the whatever you call the thing, and it looks like a peace sign that's part of the Mercedes-Benz logo. So that is both material and let me see if I can find it. We got their logo. I'm sure they would love to hear that. So so this is a symbol, right? It means something. In our culture, it means it's corresponded with wealth, and with this company, with this, it has this certain tone to it, and a certain symbolic meaning. And then you also have the literal symbol on the car, on the front of the car. And when I was in high school, there were musicians who wore those, I don't know, what do you call them? Things that sat on the end of the car on necklaces, like they have big chains, and I guess they were stealing them off of cars and wearing them on jewelry. So another example is if you think about a stop sign, right? A stop sign, material culture, you can touch it, but it's also non-material culture because it's very symbolic. It has a certain shape. I could show you black and white pictures of stop signs and other kinds of signs with no words, just a black outline, and you would be able to pick out a stop sign. Stop signs are a certain color, and they have language on them. And the language, the words are symbols that represent words, and words are symbols that represent ideas, right? So language is a symbol, and writing the actual words represent the language. So we have all different kinds of symbolism. So a symbol something that can represent or, something else. And language is the way that we communicate. And language is not always verbal. And a lot of times, the really important parts of language are nonverbal. So nonverbal is written, but also there's gestures, right? And there's tone, right? And there's, just all the other little things about language that allows us to communicate other than words, right? So, when sometimes when you're in an interaction with someone, what you're feeling and what you're hearing do not match. So, people can be saying one thing but feeling another thing, and that gets communicated, sometimes whether they want it to or not. You can kind of feel that, like they may be angry, but they're saying, oh no, I'm not angry. So there's nonverbal communication that we've learned to pick up on through the process. So part of our culture are the values, right? And values are ideas, right? Values are not rules. They don't tell us what to do, right? Values are just ideas. So you don't harm anything that is smaller than you. So, for my daughter, that include like her best friend, or the girl who considers my daughter her best friend, and my daughter kind of goes back and forth. Her best friend is, she's also 8, but she just turned 8, and my daughter's just about to turn 9. And she's very sweet and tender and, kind of open-hearted and idealistic and, just chatty and cute and loving. And my daughter's got kind of a darker side, and, she isn't cute. She doesn't like pink things. She doesn't like dolls or girly stuff. She likes dinosaurs and Minecraft, and I never got to go to the pink aisle at Target, and I never got to buy girls' shoes at Saxon, which was my dream when we adopted her. So, I asked her, she gets really upset when people tell her she's cute, and I asked her once why that bothers her so much, and she said, cute is weak, right? So to her, like, cute is a weakness, and it makes you vulnerable, right? So she's, she has a history of trauma. She has a lot, she has chronic pain. She has, this history of drug addiction and abuse. I mean, more neglect than abuse, and other, we think, we're not sure, and other issues. And so, she's a little more savvy. So she will pick on her friend. So that we try to, no, we don't do that. No, we don't pick on the dogs. If the dogs are barking and annoying, I think she just did it when we were, when I was talking earlier, that, the dogs start to bark and she comes out and yells at them, and, which is fine. I want to yell at them too. But you don't get to push them or hit them. So that's a value. And so the value is, we don't harm things that are weaker, or I don't even know what the word is. They're more, that we're stronger than. That's the value. So the rules are, we don't talk in an impatient voice with your friends. We don't push the dogs. We don't touch the dogs in anger. We don't lock the dogs out of the room. We don't run at the dogs. So those are the rules, right? So the idea is, we don't harm things smaller than us. The rules are how we put those ideas into motion. And so those are what we call the norms. So we have our ideals, which are values, and then we put them into action with our norms. So norms are the rules. And there's prescriptive norms, which tell us what to do, and proscriptive norms, which tell us what not to do. And all norms can be written either prescriptively or proscriptively. And we already know about ideal and real. And, you know, you'll be shocked to hear that most people, when you ask them about their adherence to values, societal values, or even their own values, people are not honest, right? We know that everybody lies every day for the most part. For example, even though honesty is a value in our culture and it's often an individual value, but people lie. So, you know, we don't always follow. So we have an ideal of what the world is like and how we are, and then we have the reality of what we do. So values are the ideas, norms are the rules. Norms can be formal and informal. So the formal norms, the most common kind of formal norms are laws where we've like gone, you know, we created the criminal justice system. We've voted these norms into law and said, look, you guys have the power to make sure we follow these norms. And these are the formal norms. And there's informal norms, which are the elevator rules, right? Or, you know, how you sit at a dinner party, which forks you use, sending a thank you note, bringing a gift when you go to a party, you know, letting the person merge when you're coming up on a exit, right? So these are things that are informal. And one of the ways that we teach and enforce norms are with sanctions. And sanctions are consequences. Right? Sanctions are the result, things that we do when behaviors happen and they either signal approval or disapproval. And sanctions can be formal or informal. So, you know, a sanction like for, you know, if you, I don't know, sanctions, formal sanctions, like for my daughter, if she does something I like, you know, can be saying, thanks, honey. Or if she does something I don't like, can be, I don't like that. And in that kind of just that difference in tone of voice, right? A sanction can be a jail sentence. A sanction can be going home and getting a gun and coming and shooting someone. A sanction can be a raised eyebrow. It can be a smile. You know, it can be the Congressional Medal. It can be the Purple Heart. And all throughout the day, we give and receive sanctions, and we change our behavior in order to avoid negative sanctions or get positive sanctions. So we adjust our behavior to avoid them, right? Which is why we all slow down when we see the police officer. And another way that we categorize norms in sociology is to look at them as folkways and mores. And so you can always tell when someone's taken sociology because they know the difference between folkways and mores. You know, this part really should be up here. So folkways and mores are a way to separate the ideas of culture and our norms. So folkways are just general ideas of how to do things, right? And there's no serious sanction if you break a folkway. So the folkway is, you know, about like the parking space. So if a parking space opens and someone's sitting there with their turn signal on, then they get it, right? And if you don't do that and you drive in and take it, then, you know, there's a good chance nothing's going to happen except the other person's going to be yelling at you in their car. Now, if you live in the United States, there's some chance a person's going to get out and kill you, but that's pretty low, right? So folkways are the elevator rules. They are, you know, like all the rules about going to a wedding, right? And wedding gifts, and you know, don't wear white. You don't wear a white dress to a wedding. So all the different, just, you know, my husband was helping me grade exams once, and he was like, "What are folkways?" And I was like, "They're the ways folks do things," right? So it's just the general ideas. Mores, however, are things that are the strongly held norms of society, right? So these are the things that we really, really care about, right? So mores really matter. Folkways are just, you know, this is how we do it, but mores are just, you know, don't even think about it, right? So this is where you get rape and sexual assault, incest, murder, and even murder can be acceptable under certain circumstances. But you know, I have my parents have a friend, and you know, let's call her Mary. And Mary was her mom, and her mom's name is Joanne. And Mary was married to Mike. And Mike divorced Mary and married Joanne. So he divorced his wife and married her mother. He got a divorce from his wife and married his mother-in-law, right? And that sense you have of like, that's disgusting, that's just wrong, that sense tells you that it's amore, right? That it's just wrong. You just don't do that, right? You just don't. Ew, right? Anything that makes you go, ew, right? So one of the things that's happened with the introduction of the internet is that mores have shifted. So because a large part of the internet is made up of pornography, and a lot of the things that we see in pornography now used to be taboo, right? And taboo is just, you know, really, really kind of intolerable to society, but it has become, you know, it's kind of become more and more, as more and more people see it, it becomes more and more part of society, and mores can become folkways. And one of the problems of the internet is that it brings together people who are doing very deviant things. And when people are doing very deviant things in isolation, it's one thing, right? And it tends to have a smaller impact. But when people are doing very deviant things and they find other people doing very deviant things, it can start to remove some of that ew factor and some of that you just don't do this factor. And people can start to do things that they never would have done before. And we see a lot of that now with the internet, because people, if other people are doing it, you're more likely to do it and feel like it's okay. So there's lots of research showing that if other people are cheating, you're more likely to cheat because you feel like it's okay. So the task for this video, we talked in the very beginning about this idea of culture shock, and culture shock is coming to a culture, and all the stuff you take for granted is new. So there's a video here I'd like you to watch about a Iraqi family, I mean a Syrian family Syrian refugees coming to Germany. Syrian refugees who are taken to Germany. Okay, so I'd like you to watch that video. And then another part of, to, you know, kind of get an idea of what culture shock looks like when you come into a brand new culture. And then another important part of culture in all cultures is storytelling. And, you know, when we pass on stories as part of our culture. So there's stories that we all know, and then reading books and myths and the Bible and all these stories, you know, are an important part of our culture. And so there's a radio program called The Moth, and The Moth is an organization where people go to learn the craft of storytelling, and then they present their stories at events put on by the Moth, and their stories are recorded and they're made available online. And listening to people's stories can be very powerful, and you are exposed to kind of our culture in a way that you may not be used to. You know, it's part of where I think why people are kind of drawn into reality television, because it's part of our culture. It's like we really like you know, being voyeuristic, but then we make fun of the people who want the attention. So we're very conflicted. Like, we want women to look young, but then we make fun of women who get plastic surgery in order to look young, which is what we told them that they have to do. So we watch the Kardashians, but then we make fun of them. And there's a certain kind of storytelling in these reality television shows that tends to be more superficial than the kind of storytelling I'm talking about. So I'd like you to listen to a specific story from The Moth, and then I'd like you to go to The Moth and just pick another story to listen to. They're 20 minutes long, and there's, you know, hundreds of them available. So the story I'd like you to listen to is probably the saddest story I've ever heard. And I am known for liking sad things, dark things. I tend to, you know, be like find more meaning in the world over there than in the world of the Kardashians. This is a story of a man who had an adopted daughter who was killed, and his subsequent forgiveness and relationship with her murderer. And I'd like you to listen to the story, and I'd like you to think about culture and his culture and our culture, how we normally deal with murder, and, you know, the fact he's a Quaker, so what the culture of his religion tells him how to handle the situation that he's in, and to just listen to it. Okay, and then the last part is to go to The Moth and pick one of the stories. Now, The Moth episodes are made up of 3 stories. You don't have to listen to 3, you just pick one. Okay, and then so for the written assignment, what I'd like you to do is go to the Google Doc here and tell me what you thought of the story that you listened to here. And Mr. Black, what's your response to Mr. Black's story? And then I'd like you to tell us about the story that you listened to and what it was about and what you thought of it. So just your response to it. It doesn't have to be anything long or elaborate, just what you thought, and oh, I totally forgot. Also, the same thing for the Syrians in Germany. So so you'll be writing 3 things. One is, you know, kind of what did you think of the film? What did you think of Herman Black's story? And then tell us about the story that you listened to. So there'll be 3. You know, you'll have like 3 paragraphs in your written assignment. Okay, and that's it for this lecture. And I'll see you next time.